Which week and day are we talking? Turn it on. Does it stay off? Okay, good. I said, if in my decision I think mine was my first time, so I didn't know that it just select one, and that makes sense because it's represented. I did this thing, but like putting your bubble, like I don't know any of these people. And I didn't even after looking them over, I guess here's who I go with. My original email, which so Todd, I called, so I didn't tell you that. I didn't know what the protocol was. So. No. But this is the better experience. And then what costs their budget. But then you don't have to you just need to
Starting to sound like who's the first one?
But I mean, the thing
he's joking around about film guys.
That's why I didn't. She might be telling. Ready? Call to order the work session on FY21 budget.
Thank you. I think everybody's got a hard copy of this. We sent out and put out on the website the same document yesterday ahead of the meeting. We'll go through it. This might be a fairly quick one. We have a follow-up, of course, in 2 weeks, and that might be more necessary than we thought a month ago because we got to see what happens in the legislature. The final day, the veto day on Monday. But we can go through this fairly quickly. I'll just cruise along and stop me if you have questions, okay? So the very first thing I'd say is on page 4, kind of in green on the middle of every page there, this is what the page number is. That's very familiar to you. It's our district 5-year plan, and in yellow we kind of have our key variables that kind of drive this plan. That's this document right here. One thing I would point out, and you're all aware of this, and we had a very detailed discussion on this last year, this box here is kind of the beginning of that $7.5 million opt-out going away. That'd be halfway through fiscal year 22. It's the calendar year 2022. When we met with the Finance Action Network last year, they said maybe you should do some like CD laddering, smaller incremental opt-outs every year instead of large ones every 4 or 5 years that could put massive holes in your budget if they weren't approved into the future. So we did $1.5 million opt-out last year. We didn't increase it. We just, in the anticipation of this $7.5 million opt-out going off, And this budget would, I mean, we would propose $1.6 million just to put some inflation in those for next year, although we're not, once again, we're not increasing the opt-out. We're just trying to replace the $7.5 million opt-out incrementally. So that's what that box is for up there on line 6 and then down here as well. So the key, I'm going to go through some of these key variables. As we all know, the state aid formula in 2016, when they did the half-cent sales tax, they did some major changes to the formula, and one of those items was redistributing other funds that were outside the formula in the past. For us, that's gross receipts tax, it's bank franchise tax, which is our biggie, and county apportionment, which is county fines. Not a huge deal for Sioux Falls, but if you're a rather small district and you have a weigh station in your county, yeah, that was a big money maker. So they folded that into the formula. They're doing it over 5 years. We're a net winner on that. And so we're rolling in future funds there as they come in because they're phasing this in. That's what's happening on that other fund distribution line. And I keep pointing at it and nobody can see it. So. That's this line right here. The next one is...
what line number?
I don't have a line. It's down below the line there.
Okay.
It's that on the key variables. It's the very first one under revenue. The equalized other revenue, that's just where I keep track of our funds that are equal in that formula. So I'm not, if they go up or down, it's really not a net increase or decrease because it's being equalized across the state. So that's across the state. So what I do is just inflate that what we're assuming the state aid amount's going to go up. State apportionment, that is not part of the equalization because it's based on students. It's every 4 years you vote for your school and public lands commissioner. They watch over that money and send out distributions to the schools. That's on a per student basis, but it also counts private school kids as well too. So that's why it isn't in the formula. Opt-out, we have budgeted next year what we had this year, and then we have kind of a slow increase of that as we go out into the future. And you can see by 2025 it'd be $12.5 million, and that relates to another item I'll show you coming up in 1 second, which is right below that, the transfer from capital outlay fund. The junior kindergarten does not fit this line anymore. I should have crossed that out, but this budget has $4 million in it to help balance it, transfer from the capital outlay fund. We can do that now because of we can pay for our capital projects, the CIP. Jeff just gave a report on that Monday night. We're paying for that with bond proceeds. So we have, and we can do that for about 3 more years. So we have some extra funds in the, or we don't have any projects we have to do with using capital outlay dollars for that. But we can't do this forever because the bond money will be spent sooner or later. So we're trying to phase ourselves out of that and bring in the opt-out and not change the levy much is kind of why that's phasing in and out like that. State aid increase, we budgeted 2%. That's what the law required, the 3% inflation, whichever is less. Inflation was 2%. That was passed, but there is a question whether it's going to get signed. And they have 1 more day of the legislature, Monday, so we'll know a lot more after that. All right, so if you skip down to the expenditures, which is right below that. So if you skip down to the expenditures and look right below the yellow line, because the salary increase is linked to state aid. So we had, that just equals that figure. So it's just 2% going out. Now this budget here, as the board knows, because we were trying to keep teacher salaries moving forward, has the option every year to do an additional 0.75 to just keep the salaries from stagnating because there's a teacher delta and whatnot. So that is in this budget. I just have the 2% there. It's a 2.75. We'll change it one way or the other based on what happens next Monday. Just so you know, I guess if we were to get 0%, the salary agreement would call for a 1.25% salary increase. It's tied to what we get from the state, but below 2, between 2 and 2.5, it stays at 2. And then anything under 1.5, it's split 50-50. So you do the math on that, and then 0% equals 1.25. A 0.75, just so you know, a 0.75 increase costs the district about $840,000 in the general fund. So we're budgeted at 2.75. If we went down to 1.25 and didn't do the extra 0.75, you could save almost $1.7 million on that. By the way, 1% increase or decrease in state aid is about $1.5 million. So
and that's all staff, not just teachers.
Yeah, right. That's all staff members. That's right. And this number, the numbers I'm giving are in the general fund. The same type of ratios would be in the special ed fund as well. So a 2% cut in what we budgeted, I guess, would be close to $3 million. Other items in here, we talk about the efficiency factor. We did not, we went for that 1% last year, and it was kind of painful. We did not, we haven't budgeted a real heavy one going out. We think it's fairly realistic. We've been cutting for the last 10 years, 15 years, it seems like. I mean, we add some programs, but the ones that exist, we're always building in this efficiency factor, and our fund balance kind of blows up if we don't do that. I'll show you that on the next version of this same page, just what that looks like. Our teacher delta, that figure's pretty safe, that 1.2. That's just it's a weird word for turnover in the all staff actually, but most of our salaries and benefits are teachers. So we see that as about $1.2 million. Health insurance increase, we actually put in 5 and the literal number's in there, but it's actually 2.1 for this year. So I have to change that. That won't change the number because I just hard coded in the actual budget for the current year. But we put in 5 because that's our maximum as we go out. That's the district's maximum exposure on healthcare. So it allows you to kind of, since you get a pretty good look at that, it allows you to make a pretty good plan versus we used to have 10%, 12%, 14% increases, and you could never do anything with your budget because you were always afraid that you might have to spend 10% or so on your healthcare. So those are kind of the key items. If you switch to the next page, it's the more traditional look at this document. And I just, it's the same info, but what I wanted to point out is if you look at the kind of the very bottom of that efficiency factor, that's showing you, well, first of all, look at line 21. Our fund balance is right around where we want it to be throughout this, kind of spikes up at the end at 10.2. That's assuming these efficiencies carry on, and we get that. But if you look at what the very bottom, then line 41, if you look at what the efficiency factor is doing to this, but without it, our fund balance would be down at a low of 3.1 and down at 4.5. So that's the only thing I really wanted to point out on this. Oh, just one other thing. This current budget is going to spend about $223,000 if it works out as it is right now, $223,000 into the fund balance. That's a little different than when President Mickelson and board member Tolke are on our budget review committee. Since that time, I've adjusted down the interest income, which was based on last year and half of this year. It was about $1 million a year. I've cranked that way back down, and that's what kind of caused that number to actually go slightly negative. Next, we always include in our budget documents kind of what's gone on since we picked 2000. Thought that was a pretty good base year. What's gone on with school taxes and since 2000, and you can see if you look about right here. I mean, it varies from year to year. Sometimes it's a drop. Sometimes they go up. The values in Minnehaha and Lincoln counties on houses have been going up lately. So in the last few years, the annual increase has been higher than it has been. But if you look, the total increase over from 2000 to 2021 is 41.1%, and that works out to an average annual increase of 1.7, not too out of line. Just to compare to something, I just look at the state sales tax and gross receipts tax, how much is raised based on the estimated population, and that goes up about 3.9% a year per person in the state. And this assumes, this is a house that hasn't been added to, they haven't added a garage, it's just a house and just a house inflating year after year. That's what we're looking at on this document. So any questions on any of that? That's kind of the summary of at least the general fund and then the property taxes. Questions? Don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but these are the general fund revenues as budgeted now. I just point out, like the interest earned, that's what I just talked about a second ago. When we looked halfway through the year, we were right on to make our $1 million. We were $500,000 halfway through the year, and we were going to hit that. But interest rates are at or approaching zero, so we really scaled this back, and that was kind of the biggest change. Other than that, there isn't a lot of change in here. Like I talked about before, the gross receipts tax, the county apportionment, general state aid. I'm just inflating that at the state aid rate because that stuff gets equalized anyway. This year, we are going to come in really well on the bank franchise tax. I think it came out fairly well, although what all that means is 2 years later, you get less state aid. So when you come into the good on that, you just put it away as a reserve for when the state aid is lower in the future. That's how we're treating that. So that's a real basic look at our revenues. And this is a summary look. I'm not going to spend a ton. This is just on a couple of pages, 2 or 3. Our general fund expenditures by cost center or program. All of these were funded at the recommended level. It just gives you last year's FTE, next year's FTE, the budget for each, and then the increase or decrease to all. It's just kind of there for your perusal because we'll go into more detail. We have this, right after that, we have this spreadsheet, which actually was first pioneered by the folks out at STI, and we ended up copying that about 10 years ago, where it gives you kind of the same information, but it also gives you an explanation of exactly what's going on. And I think I said it, but I'm going to reiterate it. We took all the recommended levels from we didn't make them go back and make changes. So of course the level 4, unless it's like a federal program where they only do one level because they can't cut the budget, they can only spend what they get. And if they don't spend it, it's money that just reverts back to the federal government. So for most of our levels anyway, we have a level 4 would be what's it going to cost you next year to do what you're doing this year. And the best example of that, kind of for the public, not for you so much, is if we're going to have 200 more kids in high school next year, if you didn't increase their FTE, you would artificially raise the class size. So we say, here's the projection, so budget to keep your class size at what it's at. So that's current level. So that's why sometimes the dollar amounts fluctuate even when it's the current level. Other times the delta is hitting these and the staff aren't quite as expensive as they were projected to be because some retired there, so it will show up as a negative number. So the reds are increases, they're negative to the budget. That's why we use reds. Blues are decreases, it's positive to the budget. And you can see those numbers. I'm just going to point out the levels that are not level 4, and just a real quick, and if you have a lot of detailed questions on any of them, stop me, and hopefully somebody behind me can answer your detailed questions. And elementary instruction, last year we changed that schedule. With that, librarians ended up teaching more, and we kind of added some librarian time. But in that, we have other specials where the FTE, we didn't didn't move anybody out or anything like that. It's just the FTE, they weren't quite at 1.0. So when you spread that over 25 buildings, you get some efficiencies there. And so they were able to go at a level 2. Middle school instruction, that is the 5 CTE EAs that we talked about last year that we did not reduce. There's a trade-off for there, and I'm going to point about that. When we write an instruction every year for the last 5 years or so, maybe even more, we say like the middle school group, if you want an increase within your group in the 4 or 5 different budgets you look at, can you cut something to fund that increase? This might be the first time, but somebody actually did that this year, and that's this group. So we'll talk about that increase here in a minute. Indian Ed, they were able to do, we told them to look at a level 3, everybody, try to look at it. They were able to cut $5,700 in supplies, that's cost center 134. Secondary behavior, that's cost center 605. That was, that's a middle school Odyssey classroom, a behavior classroom. They're full in there, and they're going from 3 to 4, I think, is that right, Jamie? Yeah. 3 to 4 classrooms, and that's the offset for the middle school EAs. Counseling, 546. We have 2 very large elementary schools, Discovery and Pettigrew, and they're going to split a counselor, so they're going to each be at 1.5 counselors. Athletics, middle school, and wrestling and gymnastics at the high schools. That there's a bus that runs from each school over to a high school. Not always, I'm not going to say that, but oftentimes it's empty. There's going to be a middle school program, but we're not going to take them over to the high schools. Is what's going on there. Staff development is that's cost center 140. That's a half FTE elementary intern based on the formulas where we determine that, and then to try to make page training for new teachers systematic. So they'll teach for a year, and then at the end of the year, we're going to add a couple of days to the calendar so they can get page training. And those 2 things are the increases in staff development. Admin legal, reduced, that's cost center 56. They reduced some supplies and materials, and then sub-pay for the internship program wasn't as high as budgeted. So there's a cut there. Operational services, Jeff Kreider's crew usually finds efficiencies every year, and they're at a level 2. There's phone rates and other items in there as well. Fiscal, we were able to, just based on non-utilization of hourly and some purchase services, we were able to go with level 3 there. That's 67. And you guys might not have known this, but you took a level 1 cut at the school board and election services item. What that is we had the Gallup survey budget in there, and we're doing that internally. So that's what that cut is. Any questions on any of those? I'm going to catch up. Let's go through this. So let's take a look now at special ed. We're going to be on page 22 for the revenues. Now, special ed may or may not be in the same boat as general fund. They did not inflate the special ed formula, but what they did do is the law requires every 3 years they look at where the actual expenditures are happening, and they reallocate on the per student amount for the severe students, and the expenditures are usually higher than what state aid is, so the amount kind of naturally floats up when that happens. So I believe our increase was right around 2% anyway, without actually then doing that and then inflating it another 2%. So the governor's original proposal was general fund flat, special ed, do the reallocation. If they go back to that, then special ed, this shouldn't be affected. So these revenues should be right. If they do something different, then we'll have to take a look at this as well. But so you can see our revenues are about $47.8 million, and our expenditures are 47.4. So they made some significant program adjustments last year, and even one this year that isn't really a cut, but it's a nice program adjustment. Deb just gave the report. Monday night. So their budget's actually looking to actually grow its fund balance. The fund balance has been declining for the last, well, kind of since almost 2012, probably FY12. So they're actually looking to grow next year a little bit, get that fund balance back up to a more comfortable level. So they have some programs that you just have to, they have some more level ones than we do in the general fund. So if you look through there, everybody's either a 1 or a 4. There is one cut in secondary behavior programs, item 605, and that's a level 3 of 4. It isn't, it wasn't a significant cut. It had to do with teacher hourly items. And then there's an increase in here as well. It's 627. And I think that's it. Yeah, that's an expansion. And what that is it's a pilot program to hire a board certified behavior analyst. And what that has to do with is cognitively impaired kids who are behavior problems, try to get somebody in and work on making that better so it doesn't get worse. So that's a pilot project, and that's the only increase that's in their budget. Of course, salaries like in the general fund we're at 2.75, holding to see what happens Monday. Next is the capital outlay fund, and there's our 5-year plan. I should catch up here too, sorry. Ann isn't here to make sure I'm moving this way. And these documents are available on the web as well. Those were put out there. So I just kind of use this to kind of show you where I'm at on this document. You can look at it in front of you. So we've got our $3 promise that's in effect, where between the capital outlay fund and the bond fund, our levy will be $3. So that's contained throughout this plan. So we've got revenue growth, but it's not as high as it would be without that promise. So that is contained throughout this plan. Down here on line 46, we have that transfer to the general fund of $4 million, and then $3 million, 2.5. When you get down into what the CIP would look like, the CIP, we do have a fund balance at the end of FY21 of 3.6 million. We show that growing to going down slightly to 2.2, and then 2.1, and then growing as we get out, where we're going to start need those funds. And remember, you don't have to have the cash. We don't usually fund large projects with cash. We usually do a much smaller capital outlay certificate issue, and so this money would actually move up into those items under lines 15 through 21, where that's our capital outlay service, debt service up there. Our replacement banks are in pretty good shape. We're actually tapping in to the wireless replacement bank and the technology AV replacement bank next year. We've saved up some money for the last couple of years to fund these expenses happen occasionally. They don't happen often, so you don't want to be hit and then have to scramble to find the money. So we just budget a little bit and drop it into the replacement bank. And now when we need it, it's available. And so we're tapping into that next year. You see that on the bottom. So behind that is the individual revenues and expenditures by program for the capital outlay fund. That cash from fund balance is tapping into those banks that we have there. And then we also have down here as an expenditure transfer out to the general fund. Biggest areas what we spend out of the capital outlay fund is debt service, renovations and maintenance, ongoing renovations and maintenance. Jeff has that big long 15-year plan that you see occasionally. that dictates what we put in the plan here, and it usually comes in under on that as well. And we do that every year. And then technology is usually about $4 million inflating that we plan. This year it's $8 million because we're tapping into those banks. You see that there. These are the requests or the fund. We did make just a few cuts. Everybody always, every year we knock down the capital outlay requests a little bit, but most everybody got a good portion or most of everything that they asked for. But there's a very detailed look at that available on pages 28 through 30. No, it's more than that. 28 through through 33.
Todd, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I'm getting this. When you talk about that transfer to the general fund, line item 46, you go over to the CIP years 6 and 7. That is recognized up on line item 39 then for the CIP projects fund. Is that how that gets realized on page 26?
Yeah, transfer to the general fund for $4 million. And
recognize them up on line 39.
well, line 39 is the CIP projects fund, and that what goes into the CIP projects fund is what doesn't get spent or reserved in everything else in the capital outlay fund. So we're doing $4 million there. So the CIP projects fund for next year is a negative $144,440,000. That shows up in line 72, which shows you the revenues available to the CIP project fund for that year. So we carry over 3.6 from FY21. We anticipate carrying over 3.6 million. That comes up to FY22. We're going to actually reduce that number, and we reserve it every year. So we're going to make a reduction in the reserve, so it'll be 2.2 million at the end of the year. Then the next year, we'll carry over the 2.2, and since we're going to do 3,250,000. We're going to reduce that reserve again by about 80,000. So we'll be at 2.14. And then after that, when we phase out the transfers, we're going to start pumping that fund up. So if you look out there in FY24, we have 3.8 million into the CIP projects fund. Coming into it that year, added to 2.1, so we're going to end up at 5.9, and then the next year it would be at 10.8, but we'll be tapping into that. So we just don't have the projects figured out yet, but there will be projects that will be tapping into that probably by FY25. So that kind of between now and 2025, you have $10.8 million to spend on CIP projects outside the bond fund. Does that make sense?
So we're phasing out that general fund and calling it moving to that CIP.
Right. Yep.
Fund.
That's right.
Yep.
So on page 35 then is a summary of all our tax supported funds. And those are the general fund, which we divide up into unrestricted, state aid, local property taxes, and restricted federal money, almost all exclusively federal money, except for the tournaments that Casey Miley puts on and we get reimbursed by the state high school activities association. Special ed fund, the capital outlay fund, and then the bond redemption fund. Those are our 4 funds. You can see the total expenditures for next year's right now is budgeted at $265.6 million. We have some other funds. We don't go into nearly that kind of detail. But if you want to look quickly on page 38, these are our self-supported funds. Essentially, they bill people, other funds, federal government. So Reprographics Fund is our internal service fund for copying, rather than having 40 buildings doing their own deal on copying. The Reprographics Fund handles that. ComEd fund, of course, house construction fund. So that goes back to when we used to sell the houses. Now the major materials are supplied to us, and we give them to the two different programs that fund that. We still have some money left in there, and we use it to buy equipment, essentially. Food service fund, of course, that's the school lunch program and breakfast. Capital projects fund, that's the money that's coming in right now from the bond fund. So the revenue is just transferring in from the bond fund to pay for these. And then, of course, the insurance trust fund, and that's about a 2.2% increase in our claims for next year. That's those items. And then behind that is the ComEd fund, Kids Inc. That's all the little sub funds within there. And then behind that is the summary of those. There's not a ton there because they're just a one of one, and we're just spending, essentially they're spending a little bit into fund balance, but we can actually look at what those fund balances look like. We can probably bring that to you at the next 2 weeks from now when we go through this. Didn't think to bring that today. So anyway, that's kind of a fairly quick whip through of the budget. Todd and Cynthia had a little bit more detail as we prepared these. It's kind of been a weird year. Our big group didn't meet like we usually do because everybody kind of got what they were requesting, and B, we were in the middle of, or the very beginning of the cancellations due to the coronavirus. So I'd stand by for questions, and what I can't answer, there's folks who did all the details on this behind me that can certainly answer them if I can't.
Just a quick question with technology here and so forth. Is this something, if this is a longer term break, we need to be looking more at technology, increasing our budget for not just devices, but activity, connectivity for our students and families?
It might be a little bit early to tell just yet, but there have been a couple things that, as we look at what we lean on in these times, are slightly different than what we lean on during face-to-face meetings. So some of the conversation has started about what that would look like and what that means in order to be more prepared. Not that we're expecting to have to do this necessarily again, but that some of that conversation has started to kind of track what that leaned on during this time to see how it would impact budget if we have to move in those directions.
Thank you.
I'm thinking too about the, we send many devices home with 2nd through 5th graders that we cross our fingers that they come back in the same condition that we sent them home in.
Middle schoolers.
Yeah, and middle schoolers too. And so even just some replacement costs or things like that, I don't know if we need to take that into consideration or if that's not significant enough, we don't believe.
Yeah, so I'm anticipating a slight increase in possible breakage just due to the environment difference between home and in the classroom. But we do have a calculated percentage that we purchase beyond for that need, and we think that's going to hold up in this particular case, which shows that I think we've accounted for it. If over the next couple of weeks that doesn't seem to be the case, we still have a little bit of time to adjust our purchase for next year for the Chromebooks that will come in order to account for that.
Do those insurance policies? Oh, sorry.
Well, I was actually going to go, is there a way to, I'm just, as an example, I have a middle schooler. I didn't get them insurance because I know that the Chromebooks stay at school, but now they're home. Yes. Is there an option to let parents sign up for that coverage in this sort of new world we're in right now, or is it too late?
I don't believe it's too late. There's a prorated insurance amount. So we're following the pattern that if someone were to have moved into our school district, they would do a prorated insurance offer to them. So that's what we've done for 10 members for anyone who needs to add that insurance. Lisa.
That might be a good communication piece.
Sure.
To middle schoolers particularly, right. Or even the elementary as well. Yeah.
Right.
Yep. That would be great.
Todd, I have a question about the self-supported funds. Again, in this current time, Kids Inc. isn't running with one exception. School lunches aren't being bought, but granted, I'm assuming, well, we're still buying food for some of the sites that we are providing meals at. What is that going to look like?
Well, I think next year, hopefully we're back to normal. So this budget hopefully is right. What it's looking like right now, we've had some tremendous partners actually on the school lunch side, where we do the summer feeding program, and we're kind of setting out to follow that, and then we've expanded that, and then we've gotten really good flexibility from the state Department of Ed. Maybe that came down from USDA, but surprising flexibility on that, where we can serve meals, we can take them around on a bus, we can do lots of things. We can do grab and goes. Usually you have to eat your lunch on the site in the summer feeding program. So we've got I think now it's like 76 or so stops, and I think we're adding 4 tomorrow for some of the John Harris area that we bus to. So we're going to be at right around 80 stops where we're delivering those meals. And I understand it. You have to give a lunch, and you can give like tomorrow's breakfast. And if we don't have a program the next day, we can give tomorrow's lunch and then the next day's breakfast too to a student. If an adult is coming to pick up for kids, that's still not allowed. However, community partnerships are great. We have money left over from the Barrel House, their Hungry Hearts Fund that was funding programs served in the meal. There's some left over. They gave us permission to fund those meals that won't be funded by the USDA. And Sioux Falls, I can't think of it.
Corona Sioux Falls.
What's that?
Corona Sioux Falls.
No, it's Sioux Falls.
The Sioux Empire feeds kids, or
Yeah, I have to tell that to you, because they gave us a check for $40,000, which will fund about 13,000 of those types of meals.
Okay.
And we had a $100 donation. You'll see that in the minutes as we go forward. But they're really stepping up to help fund those, so we can be more flexible than what the federal government which with its great flexibility is allowing us to do. So we get in trouble, like our insurance trust fund. If we make money in this, they don't want you making money on it, but we certainly don't anticipate losing money as we go this year. Kids Inc., the vast majority of those staff are like kind of like subs. They're not subs, but they're not in a group. So we're for our negotiated groups, we're trying to make sure nobody loses their salary. But for individuals who are part-time, hourly, or they work part-time for us, we haven't made that commitment. And now so for those individuals, the unemployment insurance they've laxed their rules as well. So that's available to them, and they're trying to pass something out in Washington that would make that even more beneficial. That's what I heard last. That hasn't passed yet, but so we're not dipping into. I think Kids Inc. is going to take a little bit of a hit this year, but it isn't as much as you might think without revenue coming in.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is that the money that we get from the federal and from the USDA, is that specific just to food costs, so that the 6 million?
Yeah, I mean, it covers the food, but it also, it covers the whole gamut. Yeah, but then they expect us to charge for people that can afford it and whatnot. And they're very specific about, like, if we were to just say, well, like the Barrel House funds, for instance, if we were to say we're going to forgive funds, you can't do that within that fund. You have to find a source for it, and if it isn't community partners donating the money, then it would be tax dollars that would have to pay for it. So it'll fund any of the eligible expenses in the Child Nutrition Fund, which includes salaries and benefits, but they expect you to not lose money, not make money, and if you are losing money and and people are unable to pay and you're going to subsidize that, you got to subsidize that with some other funds. That's kind of the requirement there.
Yeah, I mean, principally, we run any business off of capitalization, but
Right.
I get it. And
Yeah.
it's,
Any other questions? Well, we don't take motions, otherwise I'd tell you to acknowledge the report, but we don't usually do that in this. So we're set to come back in 2 weeks. You guys, we might have a lot of much bigger change than we anticipated to this because of if that 2% is changes. Other than that, we'd come back and hopefully do kind of a quick question and answer on stuff that you've heard about the budget, but it might be a little bit more in depth than what we'd planned.
I still meant the public input today, correct?
Well, our general rules on this are that you should sign up in advance to talk on the item, but
Nobody
yeah,
has that thing, so I just wanted to make sure.
right.
If
Yep.
people are
we do.
watching from
Every
afar.
meeting we have, yeah, there has to be time.
I just
for
wanted to
public.
address that to
Yep.
make sure, and if people are watching and not see if nobody has signed up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. We also have a work session on April 8th, so if you prefer to give your school board committee reports at that time, you may. If anybody has any imminent report they would feel like they need to share any of that information, you sure may. Most of my meetings were canceled, except for budget, which we just had. So. Anyone else? Okay. If not, do I have a motion to move into executive session per SDCL 1-25-2, paren 4?
Second.
Motion second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 We are in executive session.